The summer sun glowed gently over the quiet town of Maple Ridge, Vermont, where Sarah Mitchell had been living alone for almost 2 years. Her small white farmhouse sat at the edge of the woods, surrounded by wildflowers, a fading fence, and rows of fruit she had planted last spring. The melons had finally ripened, and Sarah was determined to make her garden feel alive again. It was her way of fighting the silence that had settled after her husband, Daniel, passed away. That morning, Sarah was kneeling by the garden bed, wearing a wide straw hat, wiping soil from her hands. She picked up a ripe melon and smiled softly. It was heavy, full, and bright, one of the few things that still brought her joy. As she placed it into her basket, she heard the sound of a truck pulling up. When she turned around, she saw Ethan, Daniel's son from his first marriage, stepping out with a grin and a worn toolbox in hand. Ethan hadn't been home much since college. He was 24 now, tall, confident, and with that easy charm that reminded Sarah so much of his father. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone around until she saw him standing there, waving with a smile that carried warmth she hadn't felt in months. "Morning, Sarah," he called. "Heard you needed a hand fixing up the fence." She laughed, shading her eyes from the sun. "I do. It's been falling apart since spring. I was starting to think the wind might carry it away before I got to it." He walked closer, setting down the toolbox. "Don't worry. My dad taught me a few things before I left for college. I can handle it." Sarah smiled, her heart tightening a little at the mention of Daniel. "Your father would have loved that," she said quietly. Ethan's smile softened. "Yeah, he would have." The air between them held a mix of comfort and sadness to people connected by loss, but unsure how to bridge it. To break the silence, Sarah picked up the basket of melons and joked, "If you finish the fence without breaking something, you get a reward. My best garden melons." Ethan chuckled. "Deal, but I might need a taste test first, just to be sure they're real." They both laughed. It felt natural, easy, and real. Something Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. She handed him one of the melons, and he took it with both hands, pretending to inspect it like a professional. "Looks perfect," he said, grinning as they started working side by side. The morning slipped by quickly. Ethan fixed the posts, hammered new boards, and measured the gaps with surprising skill. Sarah trimmed vines, watered plants, and handed him tools when he asked. Every now and then they shared small stories, Ethan talking about city life, his first job interviews, and how different everything felt since his dad passed. Sarah listened quietly, her heart full of pride and sorrow at the same time. At one point, when Ethan leaned down to pick up a tool, Sarah noticed how much he resembled Daniel, not just in looks, but in the calm way he carried himself. It made her chest ache, but it also made her smile. She realized how comforting it was to see a piece of Daniel still living in him. By noon, the heat grew stronger. Sarah brought out lemonade and sandwiches, setting them on the porch. Ethan sat beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. They talked about everything, the house, the memories, the garden. The conversation drifted from laughter to quiet reflection, and Sarah found herself watching him with a mix of affection and nostalgia. "You've really grown up, Ethan," she said softly. "I still remember when you used to run through this yard with your shoes untied." Ethan smiled, looking at the fence they had almost finished. "Yeah, and you were always the one telling me not to fall into the mud." She laughed. "I still would." Their laughter faded into a gentle silence. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and for a moment everything felt calm and whole. Sarah realized how much she had missed having company, someone to talk to share small jokes with. It wasn't romantic. It was human. It was connection, the kind that eases loneliness without crossing any lines. As the day went on, Ethan worked on tightening the last bolts of the fence. Sarah watched him, holding her basket of melons. When he finally stood up, stretching his arms, he grinned proudly. "They're good as new." Sarah clapped her hands. "You did it. The fence hasn't looked this solid since Daniel built it." Ethan's expression softened again at the mention of his father. "I'm glad I could help," he said quietly. Sarah reached out and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. You've done more than that, Ethan. Thank you. He looked at her, a faint emotion flickering in his eyes. Respect. Maybe gratitude. Maybe something he didn't fully understand. For a brief moment, their gaze held. Then Sarah stepped back, smiling lightly. Now, I believe you've earned your reward. She picked up one of the large melons from the basket and handed it to him. Ethan laughed. Guess I did. He turned the melon in his hands and said jokingly, These are almost too perfect to eat. Sarah smirked. Then I'll just have to eat your share. They both laughed again. The sound felt easy and alive, breaking the heaviness that usually lived inside the house. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt something different in her chest. Not sorrow, not guilt, but hope. As the sun began to set, Ethan packed his tools and promised to come by again tomorrow to paint the fence. Sarah nodded, thanking him again. It's been nice having someone around, she said softly. Ethan smiled, lifting the basket of melons for her. Then I'll make sure to keep coming until this place looks brand new. She watched him walk to his truck, the light fading behind him. The sound of the engine faded down the dirt road, leaving her standing alone on the porch, holding a melon close to her chest. Inside, the house felt a little less empty. She placed the melons on the kitchen counter, one by one, smiling faintly. They weren't just fruits. They were reminders of the day she laughed again, of company she didn't expect, and of small moments that made life feel warm again. Sarah looked out the window toward the half-finished fence and whispered softly, Thank you, Ethan. Outside, the garden glowed under the last light of day. The melons sat in their rows, bright and full, like a promise that life could still grow, even after loss. And somewhere deep inside, something stirred, not romance, not love, but a quiet awakening of the heart that had been sleeping for far too long. That summer afternoon became the first chapter of something new for both of them, a season of healing, laughter, and gentle warmth neither had expected. The next morning, the air was cooler, the smell of wet soil still fresh from the night's light rain. Sarah was already awake, standing by the kitchen window with her cup of coffee. The sun spilled through the curtains, touching the table where yesterday's melons sat gleaming softly. She smiled to herself. The house didn't feel as lonely anymore. She could still hear Ethan's laughter from the day before, and for some reason, it warmed her heart in a way she hadn't felt in years. When the sound of a truck pulling into the driveway reached her ears, Sarah couldn't help the little flutter she felt inside. Ethan stepped out, wearing an old gray t-shirt and jeans, carrying his toolbox again. He waved from the porch, his easy smile making the quiet morning come alive. Good morning, he said. I told you I'd be back. Sarah laughed. I was beginning to think you'd overslept. I don't sleep in when there's work to do, he said proudly, tapping the toolbox. Besides, your fence isn't going to paint itself. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. Then let's get started before the sun gets too hot. They walked outside together. The garden shimmered with dew, and the fence, freshly fixed from yesterday, stood strong but dull. Ethan opened the paint cans, dipping his brush into the soft white color. Sarah worked beside him, trimming flowers and sweeping dry leaves. The air was peaceful, filled only with the sound of brushes gliding and birds chirping. After a while, Ethan's brush slipped, splattering paint on his shirt. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. You might be fixing the fence, but it looks like the fence is winning. Ethan looked down, grinning. Guess I'll need a new shirt after this. She smiled and shook her head. You remind me so much of your dad when you work. He always ended up covered in paint, too. That made Ethan pause for a moment. He looked at her, the laughter fading into something quieter. Yeah, I still remember helping him build the old treehouse. He made everything feel easy. Sarah nodded, her eyes distant. He had that gift. Made everyone feel safe. Ethan leaned against the fence, his voice softer now. You did that for him too. He used to tell me you were the calm in every storm. She blinked, caught off guard. He said that. Ethan smiled faintly. All the time. The words lingered in the air between them, sweet and heavy. Sarah looked away, trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. It wasn't grief anymore, it was gratitude. Wrapped in memories she thought she had buried, Ethan turned back to work. And the moment passed, replaced by the rhythm of brushes and sunlight. Hours went by quickly. They worked, talked, and laughed. A rhythm of companionship that felt natural, even easy. But sometimes, when Sarah passed close by, Ethan caught himself noticing small things. The gentle way she hummed when she worked. The warmth in her voice, the kindness in her eyes. He shook the thoughts away quickly, reminding himself that she was family, someone he respected deeply. Later that afternoon, Sarah came out carrying a pitcher of lemonade and a bowl of sliced melons. The sweet smell filled the air, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. "You're spoiling me," he said, sitting down on the porch steps. "You earned it," she replied, handing him a glass. "The fence looks better than ever." Ethan took a sip, then laughed suddenly. "Well, I'd say my tool did most of the work." Sarah raised an eyebrow, looking at him playfully. "Your tool." He held up his screwdriver, which now had a crack down the handle. "Yeah, except it decided to give up halfway through. Guess I overused it." Sarah laughed, a real laugh that made her eyes sparkle. "So it broke. Completely useless now," Ethan said, tossing it lightly into his toolbox. She smiled. "Well, that happens when you work too hard." For a moment, they both laughed. And yet there was a strange warmth in the air, a sense of closeness that neither had expected. It wasn't awkward, just a quiet awareness that they had become more than housemates or relatives. They had become two people learning to live again after loss. When the laughter faded, Sarah sat beside him. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the grass. "I have to say, Ethan, it's been nice having you around," she admitted. "The house feels different, lighter." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "It feels good to be here, too. I didn't realize how much I missed this place until I came back." She smiled, staring at the garden. "Your father would have been proud to see you like this. You've grown into a fine man." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "Sometimes I still hear him in my head telling me what to do, correcting me." Sarah chuckled softly. "That sounds just like him." Then she grew quiet, her tone tender. "He loved you, Ethan. You know that, right?" "I do," Ethan said, looking down. "And I know he loved you too. I see it every time I look at this house." Sarah didn't respond right away. She stared at the fence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I feel like the memories are all I have left. But days like this remind me there's still life to be lived." He turned to her, his voice low and sincere. "You're not alone, Sarah." Their eyes met, and for a brief suspended moment, neither of them looked away. There was no line crossed, no unspoken promise, just the shared understanding of two hearts healing in the same quiet space. Sarah smiled first, gently breaking the moment. "Well," she said, standing up, "since your tool's broken, I guess that means work's over for today." Ethan laughed. "Yeah, looks like it. But I'll bring new ones tomorrow." "Good," she said, walking toward the kitchen. "I'll make lunch. Maybe something better than lemonade." He followed her to the porch, helping her gather the dishes. "You don't have to cook for me, you know." "I know," she said, turning to him with a soft smile. "But I want to." As the sun dipped lower, Sarah placed the leftover melons on the counter, glancing out the window where Ethan was packing up. He looked back and waved, his grin boyish and genuine. When he drove away, she stood by the sink, her heart strangely full. There was no confusion about what she felt. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was comfort, belonging. It's a soft pull of warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel since losing Daniel. That night, Sarah sat on her porch, the air cool and quiet. The fence gleamed white under the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, she didn't dread the silence. Instead, she smiled, thinking about tomorrow, about laughter, about how simple acts, fixing a fence, sharing a drink, talking under the sun could bring broken hearts back to life. And somewhere far away, Ethan lay awake in his room, thinking about her too, not with confusion but with gratitude. She had reminded him that love didn't die. It simply changed shape. That day, with a broken tool and 2 mended spirits, they both began to find peace again. The next day began quietly, with gray clouds rolling over the Vermont hills. Sarah stood at the window, feeling the stillness before the rain. The garden that had looked bright yesterday now seemed softer, muted under the heavy sky. She liked mornings like this, calm, thoughtful, full of memory. But today something in her chest felt unsettled. Maybe it was the storm coming, or maybe it was the way Ethan had started to feel less like her late husband's son and more like a person she truly saw kind. Thoughtful, steady, by afternoon, the wind picked up. The sky darkened and thunder echoed across the valley. Ethan arrived just before the rain started, carrying a few extra tools in case the fence needed another touch-up. When Sarah opened the door, the wind blew her hair loose and Ethan laughed. "Looks like I picked the wrong day to fix anything," he said, stepping inside quickly as rain splashed against the porch. "You sure did," Sarah replied, closing the door. "But you're here now, so you might as well stay until it passes." Ethan nodded, shaking off his jacket. "Guess I don't have much of a choice." She handed him a towel and smiled. "I'll make us something warm to drink." The sound of rain filled the house, steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. Sarah moved around the kitchen, heating water, while Ethan stood by the window, watching the storm wash over the garden they had worked on together. The fence stood firm against the rain, bright and clean. "You did a good job," Sarah said from behind him. Ethan turned, his voice soft. "We did it together." She handed him a cup of tea and joined him by the window. For a while, they stood side by side in silence, listening to the rain. It wasn't awkward. In fact, it was peaceful, two souls resting quietly in the same storm. When the lightning flashed, the power flickered. Sarah sighed. "Hopefully it doesn't go out." Of course, a moment later, the lights blinked twice and went dark. Ethan chuckled. "You just had to say it." Sarah laughed too. "I really should stop talking sometimes." He found a few candles and lit them. The warm glow filled the room, casting soft light on her face. She looked at him and smiled. "You're good at this. You really take after your father." Ethan's smile faded a little. "I try to. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be half the man he was." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You already are, Ethan. He'd be proud of you. I know I am." Her words hit something deep inside him, something he hadn't wanted to feel. Since Daniel's death, Ethan had avoided coming home, afraid it would bring back memories too heavy to carry. But standing here with Sarah beside him, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again. They sat down on the couch, candles flickering between them. The storm outside grew stronger, but inside the house, everything was warm and quiet. Sarah looked toward the family photos on the wall. Daniel's smile frozen in time beside a younger Ethan. "Sometimes I still expect him to walk through that door," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his voice low. "I know. I do too. He had that way of making every problem feel small," she sighed. "He left big shoes to fill." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done it, though. You've kept everything together. You didn't let this house fall apart or yourself." Sarah gave a faint laugh. "Some days I didn't have a choice. You just learned to keep moving." Ethan leaned back, watching her quietly. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah." Her eyes met his, soft but uncertain. "I'm not sure I am." "You are," he said simply. The way he said it made her heart pause for a moment. It wasn't flirtation. It was admiration, honest and real. She looked away, feeling a warmth rise inside her chest that she didn't want to name. The storm rumbled again, louder this time. The house shook a little, and Sarah instinctively reached out, her hand brushing his. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then she gently pulled back, clearing her throat. "Sorry," she murmured. Ethan smiled faintly. "It's okay." They sat quietly again, listening to the wind. Then Ethan spoke softly. "You know, after Dad died, I didn't come back here for a reason. It just hurt too much. This house reminded me of everything I lost." Sarah turned toward him. I understand. It was the same for me. Every corner, every sound, it felt like he was still here. Ethan nodded slowly. But now it feels different. Being here doesn't hurt anymore. Maybe it's because you're here. Sarah's breath caught. His words weren't meant as a confession, just truth spoken from the heart. Still, they carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. She tried to steady her voice. Sometimes healing sneaks up on us. We don't notice it until we look around and realize we're standing again. He smiled softly. Yeah, I guess that's what's happening. Outside, the rain started to fade, turning into a soft drizzle. The thunder grew distant. The candles flickered gently, throwing shadows across the room. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The fence stood firm, the melons glistening under the rainwater. Ethan joined her, standing close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder against his. It looks beautiful, he said quietly. It does, she replied. You helped me bring it back to life. He smiled. Maybe we both needed a project like this. Sarah looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe we both needed each other. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, not with surprise, but understanding. He didn't move closer, didn't touch her. He simply nodded slowly, as if the truth didn't need more words. Moments later, the lights flickered back on, breaking the spell of the quiet. Sarah exhaled and smiled nervously. Well, that's our cue to make dinner, I think. Ethan grinned. I'll take care of it this time. You've done enough today. He went to the kitchen, still smiling, while Sarah stayed by the window for a moment longer. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean. She placed her hand on the glass and whispered to herself, maybe this house isn't so lonely after all. Later, as they ate together by candlelight, just because they liked the glow, there was laughter again, soft and natural. The kind that fills empty spaces with something alive. That night, when Ethan left for his small guest room, Sarah sat in the living room a little longer. She looked around and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not from forgetting the past, but from realizing that life could go on. Gently and beautifully, outside the last drops of rain fell on the garden. The fence stood strong. The melons glistened in the moonlight. And inside, two hearts that had been broken by the same man's absence began to quietly mend, side by side. The morning after the storm, Vermont looked like a painting. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the wet grass sparkled under the rising sun. Sarah stepped outside with a mug of coffee, her eyes soft as they followed the golden light spreading across the garden. The fence stood strong, bright white against the green, and the melons glowed like little suns resting on the soil. She smiled quietly. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a symbol of healing, of something new taking root after loss. From behind her came the sound of the back door opening. Ethan stepped out, stretching and yawning, his hair still messy from sleep. "Morning," he said, his voice low and cheerful. "Morning," Sarah replied, glancing over her shoulder. "You were up late last night." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I kept listening to the rain." She smiled. "It was comforting, wasn't it?" He nodded, stepping beside her. Together they looked at the sky, both silent, both at peace. There was no awkwardness now, only a calm understanding between them, the kind that grows when two people have shared something quietly powerful. After breakfast, Ethan picked up his toolbox. "I thought I'd check the porch steps before I head out," he said. "They're loose near the corner." Sarah nodded. "I appreciate that. You've done so much already." He shrugged. "It feels good to fix things." As Ethan knelt to tighten a few boards, Sarah gathered the ripest melons into a basket. She planned to make jam later, something Daniel used to love. When she looked over and saw Ethan working, focused and steady, she couldn't help but feel proud. He'd grown into such a good man, strong, patient, kind. She realized she hadn't told him that enough. When he stood up, wiping sweat from his brow, she said softly, "You remind me of your father in the best ways." Ethan smiled a little shyly. "That means more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "But you're not just his reflection anymore." You've become your own man." He looked at her for a moment, touched by her words. "Thank you, Sarah. I think I needed to hear that." The wind moved gently through the trees, and for a few seconds, they just stood there, two people connected by the past but beginning to look toward the future. Later that afternoon, Ethan loaded his tools into his truck. "I'll be heading to Boston tomorrow," he said. "Got that job offer I told you about. They want me to start early." Sarah froze for a second. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it made her chest tighten. "That's wonderful, Ethan. You've worked hard for it." He smiled, though his eyes looked distant. "Yeah, it's what I wanted." She nodded, trying to sound light. "You'll do great. Boston's lucky to have you." He looked at the garden, the fence, and then back at her. "I'll miss this place. I didn't expect it to feel like home again." Sarah's voice softened. "It became home because you brought life back to it." He studied her face, memorizing every detail. The warmth in her eyes, the calm strength in her smile. "I'll come back to visit," he said quietly. "I'll hold you to that," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'll even save you some melon jam." Ethan laughed. "That's a deal." They spent the rest of the day doing small chores together, fixing the gate latch, cleaning the porch, and picking the last of the ripe fruit. Every simple moment felt like a goodbye in disguise, though neither said the word aloud. As the sun began to set, they sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the colors change across the sky. It was one of those perfect Vermont evenings, soft and golden, kind that felt both peaceful and bittersweet. Sarah broke the silence first. "You know, when you first came here, I thought you were just helping me fix a fence. But you fixed so much more than that." He smiled faintly. "You too. You helped me stop running from memories." She looked at him, her expression tender. Memories don't have to hurt forever. Sometimes they can guide us to something new. He nodded. Maybe that's what this summer was, a reminder that we're still allowed to move on. Sarah's eyes grew misty, but she didn't look away. "Your father would have been proud of you, and he'd be happy knowing we're both finding our way." Ethan smiled softly. "I hope so." They sat in silence again, the air filled with crickets and the distant hum of life. For a moment the world felt completely still. Sarah felt peace settle over her heart, not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of acceptance. When it grew dark, Ethan stood and turned toward her. "I should go pack," he said. Sarah rose too, her hands folded in front of her. "Drive safely tomorrow, and don't forget to call when you get there." "I won't," he promised. Then, after a pause, he added quietly, "Thank you for letting me stay. I didn't realize how much I needed this." "You're always welcome here," she said. "This will always be your home." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped forward and hugged her. It was gentle, warm, the kind of hug that carried both gratitude and goodbye. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling tears she didn't want him to see. When they pulled apart, she smiled bravely. "Go make your father proud." Ethan smiled back, his eyes shining. "I will, and I'll make you proud too." The next morning, Sarah woke early to the sound of his truck starting. She stood by the window, watching him load the last box. When he saw her, he waved. She waved back, her heart full but steady. As the truck disappeared down the country road, the house fell quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't heavy or lonely anymore. It was peaceful. Sarah stepped outside, barefoot on the cool grass, and looked at the fence. It stood tall and white, a symbol of everything they had built. Not just wood and nails, but strength, kindness, and hope. She went to the garden and picked one of the last melons, holding it in her hands. "We did good, Daniel," she whispered softly. "He's everything you hoped he'd be." Then she smiled, wiped a tear from her cheek, and carried the melon inside. The kitchen filled with morning light, and the smell of jam soon mixed with the scent of coffee. Life once again was moving forward gently, beautifully. Just as it should. That evening, Sarah sat on the porch with a jar of fresh melon jam beside her. The same sunset glowing across the sky. Somewhere far away, Ethan was driving toward his new life. The memory of that house and the woman who helped him heal staying quietly in his heart. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood it deeply. Some people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us that love in all its forms is never lost. It simply changes shape, finding new ways to bloom. And in that summer garden, surrounded by the soft scent of melons and the glow of twilight, Sarah finally felt something she hadn't in years: peace, pure and whole.